Hello, this is Jared from Commit to Quality. In today's video, I'm going to show you how you can log in once and reuse your authenticated state across all of your tests in Playwright.net. Now, just as a quick example, all we're going to do is go to committoquality.com, enter test as username, enter test as password, hit login, and you reuse this state to act as a logged in user across all of our tests. I'm just going to log out and go back to the page that we're going to need in a little bit in the examples. And before I go into the actual code, I do want to say this has been highly requested. So if you do have any questions or comments or something you want the video created on, drop the comments down below, because the more I see it, more chance that I prioritize that kind of video as well. Now, in addition to this, Playwright do have some documentation on how to kind of sign in before each test, and then reusing the signed in state. But to be honest, it's nowhere near as good as the Playwright test documentation they have. It does show you though how you can kind of save your storage state and then reuse it going forward. But that's exactly what this video is going to be out and go into a bit more depth on it. So let's jump into the actual code. And at the moment, all I've got one single test, which is inheriting from the page test, which sets up the browser and everything for us. And it's just going to commit to quality, and it's asserting that the login button is visible because we haven't actually logged in yet, so everything should be good. So if I hit run on this, we'll see it'll quickly load and just run and work as expected. There we are, that's all green, that's all good to go. So we're not going to actually touch this test for a moment. We stay in an unauthenticated state until we set everything up. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new C# file. I'm going to say new item, and I'm going to name it loginfixture.cs. We're not going to need these usings, however, we will want to import Playwright, so we'll say Microsoft.playwright, and we're going to change this class to a public login fixture class, which we probably actually could keep as internal, but I'm just going to change it for now just in case we do need it, but I don't think we will. Now, the first thing I want to do is I want to add an attribute to this class, and I'm going to say setup fixture. And because I'm using NUnit with Playwright, this is what the attribute would be called, which is setup fixture attribute. And it says right here, it identifies a class that contains one-time setup attribute or one-time teardown attribute. And that's what we're going to be using to execute and log in once before our test. We're going to use the one-time setup attribute. We won't need to worry about one-time teardown, but if you did, you can use that attribute in here because we've said this class could contain it. Now, the first thing I want to do is I want to set up the browser and Playwright itself. So I'm going to say public iPlaywright. We'll name it PW, and it'll be get and set. And I don't know, PW, right? We'll just do PW. And the next property we want to set up is the browser. So we'll say iBrowser, name it something like browser, and we'll say get and set. Perfect. Now we want to create our method. So like I said, we want to use the attribute first. So it's going to be one-time setup. So this runs once before all of our tests. And I'm going to say public async task. Let's just call it login. That'll be fine. And now we want to actually create an instance of everything. So now we want to set up Playwright. So I'm going to say is pw equals await playwright dot create async. And if you're wondering why it's PW, it's because that's what I've named the property up here. So whatever you've named this is what this will be. So we've now created an instance to say that the Playwright driver is ready to be used. Now we want to say, okay, let's get our browser set up. So we'll say await pw.chromium, because I'm going to use Chromium. We want to say launch async, and we don't need to pass any browser type launch options, but I want to run this in headed mode. So what I'm going to actually say is new browser type launch options, and we're going to say the properties of that will be headless equals false. So in our case, we want to see that it's loaded up and working as expected, just because it's a bit nicer for the videos. Like say if you want to head it, you can remove this, or you can just set this to true. Next then, we've got our browser, so now we need our context. So let's say var context equals await browser dot new context async. And based off the context, we need to create a page. So we say a page equals await context dot new page async. Perfect. So this is what Playwright does under the scenes, kind of when we run this test here, inside page test, it's setting up, saying that Playwright is ready, setting up the browser, a context for the browser, and a page based on that context. Nothing actually to do with logging in here. This is purely just setting everything up for us. And now I can say, let's actually log in. So first thing we want to do is go to the page. So we'll say go to async. Let me copy the URL we had here. And then we want to do the login. So that would be await page.get by test ID. So we're going to get a locator for the username first. So I think it's username hyphen text box, and it is. Say that, and we want to enter in the details. So we'll say fill async, and the username is test. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy this twice, once to get the locator for the password, and another to get the login button click. So let's just take the password, which has a data test ID of password text box. And I think the login button, the password's the same of test, so we'll keep that the same. And I think there is a test ID for the login button, so let's just double check. Yes, it is, so we'll take that. But of course, we're not going to fill anything on here. So we'll say remove this part, and we just want to click the button, which will be click async. Perfect. So this logs in for us. But now we need to say, okay, go to the save that storage state. And this is where we can take the piece of code that was in here, where it says save whatever state we are when we logged into the page, or when we're on the page. Now, you might have just seen as well is there's a comment added here saying tests are executed in the test project bin debug and the version of .NET folder you have. Therefore, what they have done is they've gone back 3 to say, actually put this file into our test project. But I'm not going to do that. I'm actually going to just keep it in the bin folder, and I'll show you where that lives right now. So if I was to right click on my project and say open folder in File Explorer, if I go bin, debug, .NET 7, because that's what I'm using. You might have a different version, so yours might be titled differently. But inside here is where everything executes from. And this is where I'm going to actually keep my storage state file. You can do yours inside your test project. That's completely fine. And if you want to do that, just keep this part and then change whatever you want here. But for mine, then, what I'm going to actually do is I'm going to say path.combine, and I'll say directory .get current directory, and we'll save it as storage state.json. So when I execute this, I'm expecting now a storage state.json file to be inside that .NET 7 folder, which will end up being reused. Now, this is everything logged in, but we need to do some tidy up as well. So we're going to say, right, we've logged in. Let's now close the page. Just close async. And we want to close down the browser, so we'll say alright, browser.close async. Perfect. So that's our setup completely done. So if I actually add a breakpoint on here, and I'll rebuild the solution, what we should see now is this method will run once before all of our tests. In our example, we only have one test at the moment, but we'll build them up. I'm just going to show you here that it does run before. Now, if I just put a breakpoint here as well, so it stops on both, I'll run debug, and we should see 2 browsers are going to load. First, the one-time setup, and then this test number 1. So here we are. It's stopped here, and this is our login. So if I was to continue over this, so I'll continue here. That's done, and now we've got this second page that's loaded. If I step over, we'll see here that this test is still running. But you might be thinking, oh, wait. You just said I got to save that storage state, but look, it's still not logged in. And there's a good reason for this. It's because we're using the page test and we haven't actually done anything with that save state yet. All I said is save this file. So if I actually open folder in File Explorer and we go to bin debug.net 7, what I should see inside this folder is a storage state.json, which is what just got created here. And every time I run this now, it'll update. So if I run again, we should see that timestamp, which was 1322, will now be 1323. There we are. So it's updated. So it's running once before the test and it's updated. But our test still hasn't logged in. Like I said, it's because we're not doing anything with the storage state. If we go back to the documentation, you see here, save it, but then we need to actually create a context to reuse it. And how we're going to do that is we're going to create our own test space file, and we're not going to use this page test class here. So I'm just going to copy this file. You could just create a new one if you wanted, but I'm going to rename it and call it testbase.cs. And there's a few things we want to change. We want to keep Microsoft Playwright because we're using it. We just set up fixture attribute because we're not saying there's a one-time setup needed in here. Of course, we want to change this. So I'm going to change this to Playwright test base. Really, this should be the same name as your file as well. So I will rename the file. And we're not going to actually need Playwright here. We didn't need it in the login one either. I'll show you how we can just create an instance of Playwright rather than setting anything up here because we're not reusing it anywhere. We still want browser though, so we'll keep that. And I want page as well, so I'm just going to say protected. page of type page, and that can be get and set as well. We want to remove the one-time setup attribute. I'll tell you what, we shouldn't have just copied this. Let's just get rid of it and do it from fresh so it's not confusing. So if I start with a fresh file, this is how it's going to look with just a browser and a page. Now then, what I want to do is I want to say, create a hook that's going to set up a browser for me, which will use that context. So whenever I want to use the authenticated state, I can inherit from this class. And it's fairly easy to do. We're going to use the setup attribute, which comes from NUnit, and this one is a method that should be called before each test is run. So that's the difference between setup and one-time setup. Is one-time set is done once before all, and this is done once before each. And now then what I can do is say public async task of setup. And once again, we're going to do something similar. So I said I'll show you the different ways. So we can say var playwright equals await playwright.create async. So instead of creating the property up here, because we're only using it inside here, we'll be completely fine. And I'm going to say browser equals await playwright.chromium. I'll tell you what, we can even take it from here. Let's just say take that. And of course, this is playwright because this is what we've named it here. So we can say playwright.chromium launch async. Once again, I want to keep it in headed mode so we can debug it a little bit easier. And now we want to use our saved context. So I'm going to go back to the documentation. I'm just going to take this. Let's rename browser. But remember, it's not in this path. So I'm just going to copy the path from here. You could store this in actually a variable and pass it over if you wanted to. But just for ease of use at the moment, all I'm going to do is say get me the storage state from the current directory it's running from, which is that .NET 7 folder, and it's that storage state JSON file that we just saw when we run the tests. And then, of course, we want to set up the page. Let's say page equals await context dot new page async. And what this should do now then is this should create us a page that is already logged in because we use in the storage state. And before I forget anything, we want to add a teardown method as well, which of course is going to do the cleanup because we don't want a bunch of browsers just left over after our test runs. So we'll say public async task teardown, and we'll say await page close async, and we'll say await browser close async. And if I could spell, that wouldn't all be an issue. So there we are. So now let's rerun our test and see what happens. And tell you what I'm going to do. I'm going to hit a breakpoint here, and we're going to debug again just to see what gets hit. And a little spoiler alert, this isn't going to work. So there we are. We've gone in and we're going to log in. So let's just continue over this. And now we've hit this breakpoint here, which is to go to commitquality.com. If I step over it and we load it back up, look at this. 1, we're not using Chrome, it's using Edge. And 2, we're not logged in. And there's a very simple reason for this. It's because we're still using page tests here. So what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to copy this and rename it. I'll keep the copy.cs, but let's just say test2. I will say test class 2. And instead, we need to use Playwright test base. And now let's debug, and let's put a breakpoint on here. Let's rebuild our solution. And now we've got the two tests here, test class 1 and 2. Test class 1 should be the unauthenticated state because it's still using page test, but test class 2 should be using the authenticated state. So this would actually fail because this needs to be log out instead of login. So let's debug them and see what happens. So there we are, we've logged in once, so this is the only time we should hit this. Let's continue. Let it log in. Now we are looking at test 1, which is the one that's using page test, so it shouldn't be logged in. So step over it. There we are, log in, so it's not logged in. Let's click continue. Now what you'll see is we're going to go through our setup attribute or our setup method because of the setup attribute. It's going to set everything up for us, so we'll go there. You can see now it's trying to take us. You can see it's even better because it's loading up Chromium. Step over it. And now here we go. We've got log out and we're already logged in. So if I continue over this and continue again, it's closed down, all working as expected, and we've got 2 passing. And let's say we can copy this again just to be confident this only logging in once. We'll rename this to test 3 and test 3. Add the breakpoint here just so we go to the page. And now then, let's debug our tests, and we should see 2 that are in an authenticated state, which is test class 2 and 3, and 1 that's not authenticated. So it does our global setup for us, all good there. Goes to test class 1, and it's going to continue because I'm going to worry too much about it. Now this is one of the tests that's logged in, so we should see this hit this breakpoint twice. So we'll say first one, logged in there, continue over, see log out, continue, and now we've got another one going back to this setup for the 3rd test. Hit continue, and you can see log out is there and we logged in as expected. Continue over it and our assertions will pass again. So there we are. That's showing you now how you can reuse an authenticated state by logging in just once, but also we've shown you in this one is if you decide, oh, well, these are a bunch of tests that should be unauthenticated, well, you just don't need to use Playwright test base that we've created here. And instead, you can just use the default that you'd use out of the box, which is the page test. And that's how it works. As always, if you do have any questions or comments, please drop them down below. Like I did say as well, the more comments you put on things, the more likely I am to see comments, and then I can create videos off the back of those. And just a heads up, I have enabled super thanks. So if you are finding my content really useful and you want to help contribute towards the creation of my videos or the running of my website, then you can donate using super thanks. And as always, thank you for watching. Have a good day.